Wyoming Territory, August 1877. The baby cried as the door slammed shut behind her, dust rising around her bare feet. Adalyn James blinked against the sun, clutching her son tighter to her chest. The child's name was Theo, barely 4 months old, his cheeks red from the heat, his body trembling from more than just fear. Behind her, the boarding house door stayed shut. No second chances, no apologies. "You made your choice," Mrs. Holcomb had said, "and now you can live with it." Somewhere else. Adalyn took a step forward, arms aching from holding Theo too long. She had nowhere to go, no family, no money, just a baby and a satchel with 2 cloth diapers and a half-empty tin of oats. She walked. The street was quiet, too quiet for a town this size. A few folks glanced at her, then looked away just as quick. They saw the baby, her swollen eyes, the worn hem of her dress, and judged the rest. She kept walking. Outside the livery stable, she stopped and leaned against the wall, sliding down slowly until she sat on the dirt. Theo had gone quiet, too tired to keep crying. She loosened his blanket and pressed her cheek to his. She did not cry, she was past crying. "Ma'am," she looked up. A man stood in front of her, tall and dust-covered, with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a canvas bedroll tied behind his saddle. His horse, a lean buckskin, shifted beside him, sweat-drenched and restless. "I ain't meanin' to bother you," he said. "Just saw you sittin' there." Adalyn straightened, protective. "I'm fine." He nodded, slow and careful. "Name's Callen Judd, just rode in from Rawlins, was looking for a place to water my horse." She glanced toward the well in the back. "There's a pump around that side." He turned like he might go, then stopped. "You sure you and the little one got somewhere to be?" Adalyn hesitated. Callen saw the hesitation. He stepped back once, gave her space, but didn't take his eyes off her face. "You hungry?" Her throat tightened. "I do not need charity." Was not offering it. He crouched down, drew something from his saddlebag, a wrapped biscuit, still warm. "I got too many, figured I would share." Adalyn stared at it. Her pride warred with the ache in her belly. Theo whimpered again, small and weak. She reached out and took it. "Thank you." Callen nodded once and stood. He led his horse to the pump. By the time he came back, she had eaten half, saved the rest for later. Theo stirred again, and she shifted to nurse him, turning slightly away. She felt the man's eyes on them, but not in the way she was used to, not like the others, who had looked at her like she was a stain on their streets. "You got a name." "Adalyn." She adjusted Theo's blanket. "James." He sat down beside her, not too close. "You from around here?" "No." "I came from Kansas." There was no point in lying. "I worked for a family near Wichita. They sent me away when I got pregnant, thought I would find work here. I did for a little while, then they found out about him." Her voice caught. "They tossed me out this morning." Callen was quiet for a long time, then he said, "That is wrong." She looked at him, surprised. Most men would have said something else, that it was her fault, that she made poor choices, that she should have known better. He just looked angry on her behalf. "I will find something," she said. "I always do." "You should not have to alone." She had no answer for that. Callen stood and brushed the dust from his coat. "I got work up near the Bighorns, driving cattle, about a week's ride north. I sleep rough, but I got enough supplies for 2. 3, if he don't mind riding in my arms." Adalyn stared at him. "I ain't offering you nothing more than what I said. I do not touch women who do not ask me to. You ride with me, you get food, shade, and a place by the fire. I will not let you starve out here." She looked down at Theo. His tiny fingers curled around her dress. He was all she had. Callen waited. Adalyn took a breath. "All right." He smiled, not wide, just enough to soften his face. "We leave at first light." They slept behind the stable that night, near the straw piles under the stars. Callen gave her his blanket, took the hard ground for himself. When Theo cried in the deep dark, Callen sat up and offered to hold him while Adalyn rubbed her eyes. She watched him cradle the baby like he had done it before. Gentle, steady. "You got children?" she asked. "No." He looked down at Theo's face. "But I had a little brother once, raised him after our pa died, did not do too bad." Adalyn leaned back on her elbow. The wind was cool. She felt safer than she had in weeks. Theo slept in Callen's arms as if he had known him all his life. Adalyn closed her eyes. She let herself rest. For the first time in months, she did not dream of running. They left before the sun crested the flats, when the air still held a trace of cool and the dust had not yet risen. Adalyn rode behind Callen on the buckskin, Theo wrapped against her chest with a strip of cotton she'd torn from the lining of her skirt. The horse moved steady beneath them, hooves muffled against the dry earth. Callen didn't speak much that first day. He pointed out a spring when they passed it, gave her strips of venison jerky and a folded piece of hard tack from his saddlebag, and handed her the reins once when he walked ahead to clear a fallen log. He moved like a man used to quiet, someone who listened before he answered. By dusk, they reached a bowl of red rock where cottonwoods lined a creek. He unsaddled the horse, set a fire low and tight between stones, then dug a shallow trench to heat beans in a blackened tin pot. Adalyn didn't ask how he came by the beans. She only watched the way he worked deliberate, practiced. Theo stirred from a nap and let out a soft mewl. She lifted him to her shoulder, patting his back. "He always that quiet?" Callen asked without looking up. "Only when he's fed and warm," she said. "He's starting to look for faces now." Follows movement with his eyes. Callen nodded. "He's strong for being so little." She ran a finger across Theo's downy hair. "He likes the sound of water, calms him." Callen handed her a tin cup. "This creek runs sweet." Glacial fed most years. She drank, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "You always stay out in country like this?" "Most times," he said. "I grew up in the Medicine Bow foothills, spent more time under the sky than under a roof." "You don't miss towns," he shrugged. "Too much noise. Too many people trying to sell you things they don't believe in." She smiled faintly. "Then why were you in one?" "Had to collect payment from a man who owed my boss for a herd of steers. Took 3 days just to get him to answer the door." Adalyn shifted Theo to her lap. "You work cattle long?" "Since I was 16, he said. "Started as a trail hand, learned to break horses, now I ride ahead, scout water and graze." She traced the rim of her cup. "You ever think of settling?" "Sometimes." He poked the coals with a stick. "But I wouldn't know what to do with stillness." They ate in companionable silence. When the fire died down, he unrolled his bedroll and handed her a spare blanket. She laid Theo in the crook of her arm and lay with her back to the fire, the blanket tucked over their legs. "Callen, yeah, if you hadn't passed that stable, what would you have done different?" He was quiet a moment. "I would have wondered about you a long time." She didn't answer. The night settled in close, full of creaking trees and the low hush of moving water. In the morning, he taught her how to tie a lead rope in a quick-release knot. She listened carefully, her fingers stiff with uncertainty, but she got it on the 3rd try. He showed her how to check the horse's hooves, how to spot wear in the iron shoes. "You learn this," he said. "You'll never be helpless." "I've been helpless enough," she said, tightening the cinch. "I'm ready to be something else." The trail grew steeper on the 3rd day, the land rising toward high country. They passed a burned-out homestead at noon, a stone chimney still standing, blackened boards around it. No one spoke as they rode past. By evening, clouds had gathered along the ridgeline. Callen glanced up. "We'll make camp early," he said. "Looks like weather." He built a lean shelter from pine branches and canvas. She held Theo close as the wind picked up, his small body pressed firm to hers. "You ever been caught in a mountain storm?" he asked as he fastened the canvas taut. "No, best to hunker close." Cold's worse than the rain. The wind howled through the trees that night. Adalyn pressed her back to the earth, her body curved around the baby while Callen lay beside them, close enough to share warmth but not touching. "I used to imagine what kind of man I'd marry," she said quietly. "Had a whole list when I was 15, all of it foolish." "What was on it?" She smiled in the dark. "Tall, handsome, had to sing." "Sing," she laughed softly. "I was 15. What would the list say now?" There was a long pause. "I'd want a man who sees what's in front of him," she said. "Who's kind when no one's looking, who holds a child like he means it." Callen didn't answer right away, then he said, "I ain't much for singing, but the rest, I know how." The wind died down sometime before dawn. When she woke, Theo was still asleep, curled between them. Callen had his hand near the baby's feet, not touching just there, like a promise. Adalyn lay still, listening to the slow rise and fall of their breathing. She felt something unfamiliar settle inside her, quiet and sure. It was not hope. Not yet. But it was the beginning of a place where hope could live. They reached the southern edge of the Bighorns 5 days after leaving town, following a narrow trail marked by elk prints and the split tracks of mule deer. The air thinned as they climbed, and the scent of pine grew sharper, mingling with the clean bite of high country wind. Theo napped against Adalyn's chest, lulled by the rhythmic sway of the saddle and the muffled creak of leather. By midday, the trail opened to a long basin rimmed with spruce and granite shelves. A few hundred yards ahead, smoke curled from a chimney pipe poking out the side of a squat cabin, its logs silvered by wind and time. Beyond it, a corral held a handful of cattle and 2 horses, their coats thick with dust. "That's where I'll be through first frost," Callen said, reining the buckskin to a stop. "Belongs to a man named Lyndon, runs 50 head through the eastern pass." Adalyn studied the cabin. "He know you're bringing company." "I didn't ask," Callen said, "but he owes me for pulling his son out of a snow drift last winter. He'll make room." They rode the rest of the way without speaking. When they dismounted, Callen took Theo gently while Adalyn stretched her legs and shook the stiffness from her arms. The boy stirred but didn't cry. A door opened, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He wore a felt hat faded to gray and a vest patched at the shoulders. His beard was thick but trimmed, and his eyes narrowed when he saw the 3 of them. "You brung a woman and a baby," he said. Callen shifted Theo in his arms. "I did," Lyndon spat into the dirt. "Well, hell, I got no use for a baby," Adalyn stepped forward. "We don't need anything from you but a roof and fair work." Lyndon looked at her and then at Callen. "She speak for you now." "She speaks for herself," Callen said. "Same as I do." Lyndon grunted and turned back toward the door. "There's a shed out back, dry roof, no stove." "You want it, it's yours. You don't, there's the trail." Adalyn nodded once. "We'll take it." The shed was small and low-beamed, but clean. Callen laid Theo on a folded saddle blanket while Adalyn swept the floor with a branch broom. She found a broken crate to serve as a cradle and lined it with her shawl. By dusk, the wind had picked up, and the smell of stew drifted from the main cabin. Callen returned with a tin plate and a chunk of bannock. "He said if you're willing to help with the mending, you can eat." Adalyn took the plate. "I'm good with a needle." "I figured." He sat on an overturned bucket and picked at a piece of dried meat. "Lyndon's wife died 2 years ago. Since then, the place has gone to weeds." "He don't like company." "I don't need him to like me," she said. "I just need a place to stand." Callen watched her as she ate, and when her hands stilled, he said, "You always carry yourself like you're waiting for someone to tell you no." She didn't look up. "That's because they usually do," he nodded slowly. "You've got a way of staring down whatever's next. That's rare." Adalyn leaned back against the wall, the tin plate resting on her skirt. "I don't know what I'm doing, Callen. I've been walking forward so long I forgot what it feels like to arrive." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't need to know yet, just stay." She met his eyes. "Why are you helping me?" "I don't rightly know," he said, "but I don't feel lost when I'm near you." "That counts for something." The next week passed in measured rhythm. Callen rode out at dawn, checking fence lines and moving cattle to higher pasture. Adalyn carried water, helped mend shirts and harness, and kept Theo tied snug against her back as she worked. Some evenings, Callen returned with wild onions or a brace of grouse, and she cooked over a small fire behind the shed, the smoke curling into the dusk. One morning, she found him carving something in the dirt beside the corral, long strokes of a knife shaping a pine branch into a spoon. She crouched beside him. "You whittle?" she asked. "Helps me think." He held it up. "Might serve as a ladle if you don't mind it crooked." She ran her thumb along the smooth edge. "It's better than anything I've had in months." He looked at her then, quiet and steady. "You ever think of staying longer than winter?" Adalyn hesitated. I don't want to be someone's burden, you're not. I want to be part of something, not just tucked into a corner. Callen drew a line in the dirt with the tip of the spoon, then be part of this. With me, she didn't answer right away. A breeze lifted the edge of her skirt and Theo's soft cooing drifted from the shed. I don't know what love means anymore, she said. He set the spoon down. It doesn't have to mean anything yet, just let it start. Adalyn stood and brushed off her hands. I'll make stew tonight. You bring me something that'll hold flavor. He grinned without showing teeth. I'll see what I can find. That night, they ate outside under a sky pricked with stars. Theo lay asleep near the fire, bundled warm. Callen passed her a bowl and she took it without speaking, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. Neither of them pulled away. The first frost came early that year, crisp and silver across the meadow grass, turning every breath to smoke. Adalyn bundled Theo in wool scraps she'd stitched together from Lyndon's attic store and tucked him into a sling made from the lining of an old grain sack. He slept contentedly against her chest, his soft weight grounding her as the days shortened. Each morning, she rose before the sun, splitting kindling and tending to the hens that had gone half wild behind the shed. Lyndon gave no praise, only nodded once when he saw her efforts and let her keep the eggs. Callen had taken to breaking the younger horse in the corral at dawn, his voice low and even as he moved around the skittish bay. Adalyn watched from the lean-to one morning as he laid a calming hand to the animal's flank, his patience steady as breath. She said nothing, but she watched him more often than she meant to. That afternoon, while Theo slept beneath the shed roof, she brought her mending to the porch. Callen sat at the edge of the corral, sharpening a blade with long, practiced strokes. "Did you always want this kind of life?" she asked, threading her needle. He looked up. "You mean the riding or the quiet?" "Either." He flipped the knife in his hand, blade catching the light. "When I was a boy, I thought I'd be a preacher. My mother wanted that." Said I had a calm voice. Adalyn raised her brows. "What changed?" "I lost my mother, then I lost the use for sermons." He set the knife down. "I needed something that didn't pretend to explain suffering. Cattle don't ask questions. They just move forward." She nodded, hands working steadily through a tear in the hem of Lyndon's winter coat. "I used to think I'd be a teacher. I liked letters, but there weren't many schools near us and my father died before I could finish." Callen studied her. "You still carry that in you, the teaching." She looked up. "How can you tell?" "The way you talk to Theo," he said. "You explain the world like it matters." Her fingers stilled on the cloth. "It has to matter. If it doesn't, then what did I run from?" He leaned back on his elbows. "You didn't run, you endured. That's different." Adalyn held his gaze. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm waiting to be cast out again, like this all of it is something borrowed." Callen shook his head. "This isn't borrowed, it's built. Every day you're building it." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of snow from higher up the ridge. She pulled her shawl tighter. "Lyndon's boy is due back before the snow sticks," Callen said after a stretch of silence. "He's been trapping in the upper valley. Might not take kindly to strangers in the shed." Adalyn didn't look up. "Then we'll go if we have to." "You don't have to," he said. "I've got a parcel of land beyond the ridge, just a cabin frame and a spring. I haven't been back since I bought it." She glanced sideways. "Why not?" "I didn't have a reason to settle it." He met her eyes. "I do now." She folded the coat, setting it in her lap. "That sounds like something a man says when he wants something." "I do want something," he said, his voice low and even. "But only if you want it too." Adalyn looked down at her hands, roughened now from wood smoke and needlework. She thought of every door that had closed behind her, every cold night with Theo curled against her chest while judgment pressed in from all sides. And then she looked at Callen, sitting steady and quiet, offering not rescue but place. "I don't know what it means yet," she said, "but I want to find out." Callen stood then, slow like he didn't want to break the moment. He walked to the shed, ducked inside, and returned with Theo still half asleep, his cheeks flushed from warmth. He handed him to her carefully, his hands brushing hers. "Then let's find out together." Adalyn pressed her lips to Theo's forehead, then looked up at Callen. If we leave, it'll be before the next snow. I'll ready the pack horse, he said. We'll go slow, you'll have time to breathe. She reached out and touched the back of his hand. It was the first time she'd done so without hesitation. I already am. They left Lyndon's shed before the next snowfall touched the basin, packing what little they had onto the buckskin and a sway-backed mule Callen bartered from a neighbor in exchange for clearing out a collapsed fence line. The morning they left was hushed, the sky stretched in a pale sheet of winter gray. Adalyn wrapped Theo in a wool coat lined with rabbit fur, stitched hurriedly but strong. Callen tied down their bedrolls and dried meat, checked the mule's cinch, then offered his hand without speaking. She took it. They rode slow up the ridge, the trail narrowing between stands of lodgepole pine, then opening into a high meadow where the wind cut low and steady across the grass. Midday, they stopped beneath a rock overhang and ate in silence, just the three of them together, and no one watching. Adalyn watched the way Callen moved now, not like a man passing through, but like someone returning. His posture shifted when they crested the last rise, shoulders drawing up, eyes scanning the slope below. The land beyond was quiet and wide, a shallow valley wrapped in spruce and stone, with a crooked chimney rising from a half-built cabin tucked beside a stand of aspen. Callen pointed with 2 fingers. That's it. The cabin was little more than a frame and 4 walls, roofed with rough pine planks laid in uneven rows. The door hung askew and a pile of split firewood leaned beside it, half crumbled from weather and time. Adalyn climbed down slowly, her knees stiff from the ride. Theo stirred in her arms. You sure it's not too late in the season to start again? She asked, scanning the sky. Callen stepped beside her. We've got shelter, water, and what we need to hold till spring. I've lived through worse with less. She looked at the sloped roof, then back at him. And what about after spring? He didn't answer right away. He reached for her hand, wrapping her fingers in his. Then we grow something here, not just roots, a life, she nodded once. We'll need a stove that holds heat. And oilcloth for the windows. I'll ride to Buffalo in 3 days, he said. Sell one of the calves I've got pastured with a friend, that'll cover it. They cleared the inside that afternoon, working side by side. Mice had nested in the corner, and a hawk's feather lay near the hearth signs. The place had been waiting for someone to claim it. Adalyn swept the floor clean with a bundle of dried sage, and Callen patched the gaps in the roof with bark and tar he'd stored in a broken crate. By dusk, the wind was singing low through the boards, but the inside held warmth. That night by the fire, Theo nestled between them, soot-smeared and drowsy. Callen leaned back, legs stretched out, his shoulder brushing hers. Do you think he'll remember any of this? He asked, nodding toward the boy. No, she said softly, but he'll carry it, the steadiness, the quiet. Callen looked at her. And you, she turned to face him. I'll remember all of it. He reached for her then, slow and certain, and she met him halfway. Their kiss was unhurried, filled with the weight of everything they'd held back and everything they'd chosen now. When they parted, she rested her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arm around her without a word. By the 3rd week, they had fitted the windows with oilcloth and lined the walls with moss and bark to keep out the wind. Callen returned from Buffalo with a small iron stove strapped to the mule and a sack of flour tied behind his saddle. He brought back a carved wooden rattle too, traded from a Shoshone man at the mercantile. Adalyn turned it in her hands. He didn't need this. No, Callen said. But I wanted him to have something made with care. In the weeks that followed, they settled into a rhythm. Callen hunted and set snares, checking them early so the meat wouldn't freeze. Adalyn baked flatbread on the stove's iron lip and boiled water with dried yarrow for Theo's colic. She mended Callen's shirts by lamplight, her fingers working steadily while he read aloud from a leather-bound journal he'd kept since he was 20. One night, as the snow tapped soft against the windows, she looked up from her stitching. You ever write about what you want? She asked. He closed the journal. Not until now. She set down her needle. What changed you? He said. You gave me something I want to remember. Spring came late, the thaw slow and determined. The creek behind the cabin rushed swollen with meltwater, and Crocus pushed up through the brown earth. Theo took his first steps on the worn floorboards, arms outstretched between them, his laugh echoing in the small room like a bell. On a still afternoon beneath the blooming aspen, Callen built a small bench and set it beneath the tallest tree. He called it hers. Adalyn planted herbs nearby: mint, chamomile, and wild onion. She taught Theo their names, and he repeated them with a lisp that made Callen grin. That summer, they built a lean-to for firewood and added a second room to the cabin. Callen carved a cradle from pine, and Adalyn stitched a quilt of red and blue scraps from their worn clothes. She held it to her chest one evening, watching the sun dip low behind the ridge. "You think he'll be lonely up here?" she asked. Callen stood behind her, his hand resting at the small of her back. "Not with us," she leaned into him. "I never thought I'd feel this still. Still ain't the same as stuck," he said. "You chose this, we both did." She looked up at him, her eyes warm. "And I'd choose it again." They married in July under the same tree that shaded Theo's cradle. No preacher, no written vows, just hands held, promises spoken plain and honest. Callen slid a thin silver ring onto her finger, one he'd bought years ago and kept tucked in the bottom of his saddlebag, waiting for a reason. "I used to think peace was something for other people," Adalyn whispered that night, their fingers entwined beneath the quilt. "But it was always just waiting for the right place to land." He kissed her temple, his voice low. "Then let's give it a place to stay," and it did. Through all the seasons that followed the hard winters, the dry summers, the laughter and the quiet and the long silences, they knew how to fill peace stayed. It rooted in the worn wood of their cabin and in the soil they turned together. In the child they raised with steady hands and open hearts. They built a life not from what they'd lost, but from what they were willing to grow. And they grew it well.